So my name's Glenn Luttrell. I'm a Senior Solutions Engineer for D2L Australia. I'm also an LMS specialist in that role and been around LMSs for a long time. And today we're going to be talking about e-learning platforms or LMS platforms, everything that you need to know. Now we'd like to cover everything today, but obviously there's a fair bit to this, so we'll get through what we can. Thank you very much for joining us. This is what we're going to be discussing today. So we're going to be looking at through a range of topics, which you would have seen in the information about today's webinar. We're going to be talking about what LMSs or e-learning platforms are and what they're not. We're also going to be talking about the impact of LMS technology on education. We're also going to be talking about how to meet learner expectations and maximize engagement during online learning. We'll also talk about what the magic ingredient of an LMS is. So that's an interesting part of our conversation today, and whether you actually need a special team to maintain and manage an LMS in your organization. So hopefully covering these things over will give you a much clearer idea of what an LMS is and how to get the best out of that technology. But before we start on our first topic there's just something I wanted to acknowledge. And that is that being an educator is hard work. And that doesn't matter whether you're in higher education, K-12, you're in corporate learning or any other learning environment. And when I say educator, I'm talking widely about anyone whose job it is to create, deliver, assess, manage, administer, and support education programs, because we all have a role in that. Being in any of these roles or in any of these types of organizations, it's really challenging. And it's particularly challenging at the moment. Now, chances are many of you are time poor. Perhaps many of you feel like you don't have the skills that you need to cope with the current challenges of online learning. Perhaps things like budget and resources are limited for you as well. And so I really applaud all of you for the continuing efforts that you make to keep up to date with these challenges and to stay on top of that. And so today we're really going to be talking about the role that LMS technology plays in that. And hopefully you're not thinking, oh, I've got no time, I've got no headspace to be thinking about new technology, maybe not even the energy to think about new technology. Now, please know that we do understand that. And so the aim of today is to really help you see that when this is done right, LMS technology is really part of the solution to a lot of those challenges, not a new problem to be dealt with or a challenge that you have to worry about. So what is a learning management system? Well, simply put, a learning management system is a platform that enables internet-based teaching, learning, and assessment. And of course, not every LMS is the same, but broadly speaking, in an LMS, there are tools like we see in these images here. So for instance, there's tools that offer a range of learning resources, perhaps video, documents, audio, and image content that we can see here. Often there's collaborative tools that allow learners and instructors to engage with each other. Usually there's a suite of assessment type tools, things like quizzes and exams and assignment type tools that also provide some sort of grading functionality so that the learners can see the results of those assessment activities. Well, really an LMS platform is the tool that brings all of these things together for teaching, learning, and assessment in a single online platform. But what is an LMS not? Well, just a few things, common misconceptions that we hear in our organization. An LMS is not an enterprise resource planning system. An ERP is a tool that's designed to bring functions together into one location, yes, but it's really designed to pull corporate and business functions like procurement, finances, and HR together, not specifically about learning and assessment. Is an LMS a content management system? Well, that's a good question, because there is a content management aspect to learning management systems. And generally that function does exist to a degree in an LMS. But an LMS really is about delivering learning content and assessment. So it's got that assessment component as well. And again, while an LMS provides some productivity features, the learning and assessment context means that it isn't really suitable to be an office productivity tool in the same way we might use something like Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace. However, those tools, Microsoft and Google, often are integrated into LMS technologies in order to utilize that productivity capability. And finally, one thing we really wanted to say is LMS does not replace face-to-face learning and teaching. See, face-to-face teaching has been an effective method of teaching right throughout human history. And while in our current situation with our pandemic, that can be difficult at times, really an LMS should exist as a complement to teaching, to support it and to add value to that teaching rather than replace it. And certainly that's how we view LMS technology at D2L. But of course, not every LMS is the same. There are many, many different options of different LMSs out in the market. And that's often the case with different technologies, that they have different strengths and different weaknesses, different pros and cons. And that is because of all of these different array of educational needs that are being met by these different technologies and the context of that learning. So many of the LMSs today have originated within a single organization or maybe in a particular industry or sector where a specific educational need needed to be met. And there wasn't a product that was well suited or could be utilized for that effectiveness. But regardless of those differing needs, there are some fundamental things, fundamental similarities between most types of education that the introduction of the LMS really impacts. One is that it widened the reach of education. So what do we mean by that? Well, it was a common thing in the early days of LMS technology that it was used for what we call distance education. So perhaps there were learners that lived in country, but maybe were in remote areas. And so it was a way of providing a learning and assessment for them. We previously also used to call that correspondence education, but the LMS provided a technology component to that. But really the capacity of technology has evolved over time so that learners can access education anywhere globally. And LMS technology has really leveled the playing field in that respect, particularly for learners who maybe have accessibility requirements and need assistive technologies to access education. So a good LMS or good LMS technology has the capability to ensure that every learner has equal access to learning. There's also a convenience to using LMSs or e-learning platforms for delivering learning. It provides a just-in-time access to that learning. So the learner can read and reread, can watch and rewatch, can listen over and over again to all of their learning in one location. They can also complete assessments at a time and place of their choosing. And a personal example that I can share on that was a few years ago. This is pre-COVID. I had a course that I was undergoing that needed to be finished by a certain time. And it just so happened that it was due while I was on holiday in Fiji. And so I sat around the pool at the resort I was staying at in Fiji. I completed the activities I needed to on my phone with a cocktail in my hand. And so that convenience, and I'm not suggesting that's necessarily a great way to engage in learning. It was a bit distracting, obviously, being on holiday, but it just shows that that convenience that we now have with learning because of the advent of LMS technology and e-learning platforms. Now, another thing LMS technology has done for us is it's created efficiency. See, because LMSs bring tools together into a single place, what it means is that as an educator or even as a learner, you don't have to have multiple logins. You don't have to go to different web locations to get access to different tools and to engage in the learning and assessment. It also streamlines processes for us. So a good LMS really should make sure that you're reducing your manual labor for things like enrollment, for grading and evaluation, and even communication should be much easier going through a single platform. And again, all the tools are in one place so that we can manage the learning assessment and administration of a learning program. And of course, reusing learning and assessment is another great advantage of LMSs. So once we've created a piece of learning and assessment, we can easily reuse it again in an LMS, which means the next time we run that program, Those activities just need to be reviewed rather than being recreated from scratch. So over time, we build up a great library of resources and activities that we can redeploy over and over again very easily. LMSs also create diversity in delivery. So what do we mean by that? Well, through the use of a range of different technologies, an LMS gives us the opportunity to try different ways of delivering content. For instance, where we might have traditionally taught a concept via a lecture, perhaps maybe from a video or an animation, might be a more appropriate way of delivering that idea. Via YouTube as well, we have access to subject matter expertise that we maybe never had access to before. And so we can use that to diversify our delivery of our learning as well. And of course, flexibility is key here as well. It's where all these things come together into one thing. Through the reach, efficiency, and diversity of our LMS capabilities, we provide real flexibility in how we create, deliver, assess, and support learning content and assessment. It's very easy to shape our learning programs into something that's fit for purpose. So, knowing that we have access to all these benefits, how then do we ensure that when it comes to LMS technology, we're first of all going to meet our learner expectations, but also ensure that our learners are engaging with our learning program? Well, again, acknowledging how much work that actually goes into developing a learning program, it probably might be the last thing that we're worried about when we're developing. What does the learner expect? But the learner really needs to be at the heart of our learning program, because what we do for them in order to help them succeed really leans to our own success with that learning program as well. So how do we know what our learners expect? Well, perhaps that might come from our own experience. We know our learners, we've run the program before, and that's really a great starting point to know what our learners are expecting. But we should also ask our learners specifically what they expect from their e-learning program. Find out what's important to them, how they prefer to engage, how they want to access their program. It's easy to make assumptions about what our learners want and what they expect, but if you ask them, you might be surprised at the answers that you get about what's important to them. And then with this information about their expectations, we also need to be adaptable and flexible in not just our delivery, but also in our expectations of them. So we're not just suggesting here that you reshape an entire learning program to cater to every learner's desires. That would be impossible and impractical, but be prepared to make small adjustments to help them. Did we provide information via a video? Or could we might have some learners who prefer to read that information. So could we provide it in both mediums for them? Did some learners struggle with some of the instructions for some activities? Maybe we could organize a catch up with them via video to answer their questions. So be prepared to ask what they need and then allow for a little adaptability and flexibility in helping with that. And that's another way that we can also ensure their engagement. If they know we're listening to them and adapting to their needs, we're practical, then they're more likely to engage with the program and with us as an instructor. And so here's a real key in ensuring engagement from our learners in an e-learning program. They will not engage if you don't engage with them. And here's a cautionary tale. Multiple times throughout my career, I've been involved in some very high quality online learning programs that failed because the instructor didn't engage with the learners. They made the assumption that because it's a great program, the learner was just going to get in there and do what they needed to do. But it didn't matter how good the quality was, the learners felt abandoned. They had questions, they needed help. Even though it was great, they still needed that help. And so they felt abandoned. And so it was very unfortunate that those programs didn't succeed. So we can aid this sort of thing by providing a variety of different ways for them to engage online. See, not every learner is comfortable being on video in a virtual classroom, for instance. So we might need to provide alternate ways of them engaging, perhaps a one-on-one session with them, or maybe suggesting that they share their thoughts through something like a discussion forum. But again, regardless of how many different tools we use or how we utilize those tools, we have to stay engaged ourselves. If we don't engage, they won't either. And then finally, it might seem a little bit silly, but if we're on camera, smile. If we're communicating through other ways, use enthusiastic language. So we need to show our learners that we're enjoying ourselves, that we're happy that they're present and that they're engaging as well. Enthusiasm is infectious, even when we're online. If we don't seem like we're happy, then certainly they're not going to get engaged in the same way. So what is the magic ingredient of an LMS? Well, believe it or not, the magic ingredient is you knowing what you actually want from it. Our most important question that we can ask is, what does success look like? And the answer or answers to that question will be vastly different for all of you, depending on your organization. But if we don't know what our success measures are, if we don't know what it is we're trying to achieve, then there's no way we're going to find the right technology to achieve it, or effectively use the technology that we've got to achieve that. So we really have to have a plan. So what's involved in having a plan? Well, again, that's going to differ dramatically from organization to organization. But let's focus in specifically on what needs to be on a plan for an LMS. And we're going to focus particularly on our learner, the learner being the most important thing in this process. Remember, their success is our success. And it seems obvious to say that, but time and time again, I see organizations who are looking for an LMS that provides some of the benefits that we've been talking about as we've gone through. But thinking about the learner is almost an afterthought. They don't focus so much on the learner experience. They focus on other things. So these are the types of considerations that for our planning that are more likely, that there's more than likely some others that you need to consider as part of yours as well. But some of these might be immediately obvious to you, some things that you've already considered when thinking about your learning technology. For instance, if you're in a corporate learning environment, then it's entirely possible that your courses are professional development courses that you're undergoing. But perhaps some of these things that we see on this page might need a little bit more thinking. For instance, do we have team members with accessibility requirements that may need a little more planning or assistive technologies to support? Are your people time poor? What sort of technology can you use to assist with that? If they're doing their professional development courses, will that training be relevant for future roles? How do we support that? What do we give them? How do we provide them with a way of taking that with them in the future? So let's really think about our learners in our particular context, in our particular organization, and figure out of these measures, what success mean to them? What are they going to do? Now, notice here that when we start thinking about these, now we start to unpack a little bit more about what we need in order to assure that success. We can start to get a little bit more technical here. We've got a few technical concepts around functionality. We also start to consider pedagogy and learning design as we consider these things. So we're unpacking those success measures and starting to think about the things that we need, the tools that we need in order to achieve those things. And in some cases, even skill sets that we might require to do that. So for instance, learning design and automation, we see that it really fits in multiple categories here for these needs, how we're supporting our learners, how we're catering to different needs. Are our technologies accessible? Are they mobile responsive? If this is success for our learners and the tools that they need to use. So there's a range of different things that we really need to consider when we're examining our success factors. But there is another really important thing here too. Perhaps the most important thing that we should always keep in mind is this question: how does a learner measure their own success? And of course, a big part of that is in the learning design and setting the information out for the learner, providing it to them in a way that's going to be meaningful and help them to manage their own learning and to manage their own success. That's vitally important for online learners. They really need to know where they're up to at any given time, because they don't necessarily have the engagement with you in the same way as an instructor. Now, it's important to note here that we haven't covered everything. There's many things that will be a consideration in planning and thinking about learning management systems and e-learning technology. Timeframes are always important. Budget is always important. The resources and the skills that we have, the various stakeholders that we have to look after, all of these absolutely need to be considered. But today we really wanted to focus on the learner and their needs being the key to success, and how that relates to learning management systems and our planning. And so we can see, as we start to plan from that perspective, we start to identify what are the things that are most important, also as it relates to some of these other considerations as well. Now, one resource consideration that we did want to talk about today is this question. It's a common one that we get. Do you need a specialist team to manage and maintain an LMS? And of course, there's no simple answer to that question, because every organization is different. So instead, what I wanted to do is just briefly talk about some of the considerations that should go into your planning in terms of those types of skills. Now, LMSs are unique in that they have a mix of both the technical and the educational capability in the platform. So you can see I've broken it down into these two categories, and we'll briefly talk through these. But notice that generally we would recommend that you have one person who has the capability in both of these areas. They've got technical capability and they've got understanding of pedagogy and educational design. Very, very important, because they can often bridge the gap between those two modes of thinking. So notice as we just go down these two columns in the technical column there, model really is about what is the mechanism that you're using to deliver your technology. Sometimes we have a service that we buy, that we host on our own infrastructure, but then other times it might be a vendor-based model where it's been managed by a vendor. And so whether we have a team or not, well, that can really depend on our hosting model. Also, the scale of our organization. How big is our program going to be? That will have external people coming in there. All of these things need to be considered. From a technical point of view, how do we administer the technical aspects of a platform and support those for troubleshooting and things like that? Are we going to integrate with other platforms? Are we going to connect to other systems? So those things are very, very important. And often we do need team members who understand and can support those things. And reporting in that column is really about the functional and technical aspects of the platform. It's about, how the uptime of the platform and any troubleshooting and technical reporting that needs to be done. But then, of course, there's the educational component to this too. Who's developing your content? Are you developing it in-house, or are you going to go to a third-party service to maybe purchase or have content designed for you? Again, we may need to have skills in-house or not, depending on our model. The same is true of assessment. Is that something we're going to manage in-house, or will that be a third-party managed product? For evaluation or grading, are we going to handle that ourselves? What is our process for that? What are the requirements of that? Sometimes evaluation can be quite a stringent process, but then for other types of training, it might be a simple 10 question quiz that's self-marking, and once it's completed, the learner's done. So we really need to examine these things to determine what are the skill sets and capabilities we need in-house to do that. Educational support is also very important, particularly in larger organizations with a lot of learners. If they're struggling, you might need someone who understands the pedagogy rather than being able to technically troubleshoot what might be going on. The same is true of user administration, managing their user information as a student. How does that work? How do we manage that? And then the reporting is really about that completion reporting, their progress reporting, the quality of our program and that return on investment when we've built that program out. So there's a lot of considerations there. You need to determine within your own organization whether you need these skill sets in order to be able to achieve your outcomes in your learning program and achieve that success that we've talked about. So what have we covered today? We've got through a lot very, very quickly. Learning management systems. We talked about what a learning management system is, or an e-learning platform is, what it's not, but also the impact that it's had on education. We've learned how to meet our learner expectations, how to find out what those are, but also the steps that we need to take to make sure we're meeting those and engaging really well with our learners. We learned that the magic ingredient of LMS is knowing what your success is going to be, planning for that, knowing what those factors are going to be and building toward that. And do we need a special team to maintain and manage an LMS? That really depends on our organization. Definitely we need someone who owns that product, who is across all of those things, but determining what the requirements are within our organization are very, very important, and that will really inform the makeup of our team in managing an LMS in our organization. Okay, so thank you very much for listening. We really appreciate your attention today. I can see that there's lots of questions in the chat there, so let's quickly look through those and see whether there's any that we can answer live for us. What are some of the LMSs that are out there that are popular and successful? Well, Richard, I represent a company called D2L, and our learning management system, Brightspace, I feel is one of the best on the market. And there's a reason I work for this company. It's because we have a fantastic platform. So if you want to know more, please do let us know and we can provide some more information for you. Is there such LMS that can mark assessments, multi choice questions, short essay and long essays? Yes, Career, absolutely. Brightspace does that. And in fact, most LMS technologies do have that capability. Keep hearing CMS and LMS. What are the differences? Yeah, so content management system is just about content, whereas a learning management system has those additional functionalities that sit around assessment and grading and evaluation. So yes, you can have an LMS without a CMS, but generally an LMS contains content management functionality to be able to deliver that learning. In what ways can D2L be used to develop original content? Can it be used as an authoring tool? Great question there. We've got a fantastic content authoring capability in Brightspace by D2L. It's mobile responsive. It provides accessibility checking. It's a fantastic tool. And if you're interested, please do let us know and we can arrange to do a demo for you. Okay, wow, lots of questions coming through there. We're at our time, so I might just take a couple more questions and then we can follow up any remaining questions via email. Recorded session versus Zoom lesson is a debatable topic. How can we keep these factors alive for recorded sessions to greater and more effective success criteria? That is a really, really good question. And really that comes back to our planning and making sure that those sessions that we're recording versus a Zoom lesson are really fit for purpose. If we want it to be useful in an ongoing way, we need to plan it and structure it and design it in a way that it's going to have legs, basically. Whereas a Zoom lesson, really generally, it's a bit more ad hoc and we want that more for just-in-time live teaching. But of course, there are pros and cons to both of those capabilities that really as an organization, we need to find what works best for us. Okay, one more question. I apologize. I haven't been able to get into more detail. Last question, how is mobile different from a desktop or laptop? I find the real estate on mobile limiting. Are there some criteria for using a mobile? That's a really good question. A good learning management system that is mobile responsive will adapt to that real estate. And again, we're proud to say that Brightspace as a platform is fully mobile responsive. You can have that same experience on a mobile device as you have on a desktop device in Brightspace. Now, not all learning management systems have that capability. And so you can have some of those challenges with overlap on the screen or things not scaling appropriately. So if mobile learning is something that's really important to you, that should be part of your investigation into learning management systems to determine whether they're truly mobile responsive, even do some testing to make sure that they meet that requirement. Okay, we're a couple of minutes past our time. Thank you very, very much for all of your questions. Anything that we missed here, we'll try and follow up via email to answer those questions. But we really appreciate your attendance here. Our recording will be made available by email as a follow-up to this session. But once again, we'd really like to thank everybody for coming along today. We appreciate it.